Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be talking about one of comic books' most fascinating rivalries, or perhaps one of its most uncanny coincidences. Marvel's Man-Thing and DC's Swamp Thing. They look so similar, so you might wonder, who came first? Who's more powerful? And who's the better swamp monster? We have all the answers you need, so let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Creation and publication history. Back in the early 70s, Marvel Comics editor Stan Lee and writer Roy Thomas were chatting and came up with the idea for a new character called the Man-Thing. They brainstormed a few different origin stories for him. Stan Lee came up with the name, even though Marvel had used it for other unrelated swampy creatures before. Stan Lee had a basic concept: a man working on some experimental government drug who then gets attacked by spies and ends up merging with the swamp, turning into this creature. Roy thought the creature sounded a lot like another character called the Heat, but they didn't talk about that at the time. Roy wasn't fond of the name Man-Thing because Marvel already had the Thing from the Fantastic Four, and he worried it would be confusing. He then worked out a detailed plot and handed it over to Jerry Conway to write the actual script. So Thomas and Conway are officially credited as the writers, with Gray Morrow doing the art. They even had a second story ready, written by Len Wein and drawn by Neil Adams. But the magazine where Man-Thing first appeared, Savage Tales, was canceled after just one issue. Because of that, this second story didn't see the light of day for a couple of years. It eventually showed up in Astonishing Tales in June 1972 as a shorter part of a longer story featuring Marvel's Jungle Hero, Kazar. This also marked Man-Thing's move into color comics, where he started as an enemy of Kazar before becoming an ally. When it comes to Swamp Thing, it's a giant plant-like monster who's all about protecting nature and humanity from all sorts of threats, whether they're scientific experiments gone wrong or supernatural stuff. He's the living embodiment of all plant life in the universe, a title known as the Avatar of the Green. He's chosen by the Parliament of Trees, which is the collective consciousness of all plants, and they've had many Swamp Things before him. The very first version of Swamp Thing showed up in House of Secrets number 92 in July 1971. This initial story was a standalone horror tale set way in the early 1900s. In that story, a scientist named Alexander Olsen gets murdered by his assistant, who was trying to steal his wife. Olsen's body ends up in a swamp. He comes back as a creature seeking revenge. His wife can't recognize him in his new monstrous form, and he becomes a local legend in Louisiana. But the most famous and well-loved version is Alec Holland. He was a brilliant chemist working on a special formula to make plants grow even in harsh environments. Sad criminals attacked his lab, and he was drenched in burning chemicals, falling into the swamp. What happened next gets a little complicated. Sometimes the story says he transformed into Swamp Thing. Other times, it's revealed that Alec actually died, and the Swamp Thing is a plant creature that formed around his memories and consciousness, thinking it was Alec Holland. Either way, this version of Swamp Thing often teams up with characters like John Constantine and is a really powerful member of the Justice League Dark. Origin stories and transformation. Before he became the Man-Thing, Ted Sallis was a smart biochemist. He was working on a top-secret government project called Project Gladiator. The goal was to try to recreate the super soldier serum, just like Captain America. This project meant Ted and his new wife, Ellen Brand, had to move all the way to the Florida Everglades. Ted struggled with his work, but eventually he finished his special formula. Turns out, though, he got some demonic help because a demon named Belasco used magic to finish the serum. And in return, Ted's life fell apart immediately after. Things took a bad turn when Ted's wife, Ellen, betrayed him. She was frustrated with his neglect and spilled the beans to a group called AIM, which stands for Advanced Idea Mechanics, and they wanted Ted's formula for themselves. In a desperate move, Ted destroyed all his research and tried to escape AIM. While he was speeding away, he injected himself with the very last vial of his serum, but then he crashed his car right into the swamp. That's where everything changed. The combination of his serum, Belasco's magic, and the properties of the swamp itself transformed Ted Sallis into the Man-Thing. Becoming the Man-Thing completely changed Ted. His body turned into a vegetable-like matter, making him almost impossible to destroy and also flexible, so he could squeeze through fences and other obstacles. But he also lost his intelligence and couldn't speak anymore. He became a creature of pure instinct. While Man-Thing usually tries to do good, if you feel fear around him, he gets provoked, and if he touches you while you're feeling scared, you literally burn. In one of Man-Thing's earliest adventures, the remaining folks from Project Gladiator hired a jungle hero named Kazar to help them track down the missing Ted Sallis. At the same time, they had to deal with AIM, trying to stir up trouble with the local people. One of his most significant storylines took place early on in the adventure into Fear Comics. There, Man-Thing met a young sorceress named Jennifer Kale, Kale. She accidentally summoned a demon named Thog to the area. He defeated Thog, but after that, reality was no longer the same, with characters from other dimensions entering their world. Man-Thing and Jennifer quickly realized that the swamp was indeed the nexus of all realities, which acted like a gateway between all these different dimensions. Most recently, in the Avengers Curse of the Man-Thing story from 2021, an eco-terrorist villain called the Herald took control of Man-Thing to try and wipe out humanity. This story introduced a new dimension called the Dreadscape, which is a world inside Man-Thing himself. Ted Salas's human personality was trapped in there because of that old deal he made with the demon Belasco. But at the end of that big crossover, Jennifer Kale came back and summoned Belasco into the Dreadscape, finally letting Salas and Man-Thing get their revenge on the tricky demon. What can I say about Swamp Thing? Is he a man who looks like a plant, or a plant that thinks it's a man? This question was at the heart of Alan Moore's saga of the Swamp Thing run, which is often called the greatest in the character's long history. Early on, Moore dropped a huge bombshell that Swamp Thing isn't a transformed Alec Holland at all. Alec died from his injuries. Instead, Swamp Thing is just a mysterious plant creature that somehow absorbed fragments of Alec's consciousness and memory. Swamp Thing's mythology got even more complex with the introduction of concepts like the Green and the Parliament of Trees. The Green is like the Force from Star Wars. It's a living energy field that connects all plant life throughout the universe, and it's the source of Swamp Thing's incredible power. It exists alongside other mystical energies in the DC universe, like the Red for animal life, the Rot for death and decay, and even the Gray for machine life. Powers and abilities, similarities, and differences. Honestly, these two have a lot in common when it comes to their basic ability. If their bodies get messed up or even destroyed, they can rebuild themselves from nearby plant life. Plus, both have control over all plants on the planet. They can change their size, grow back lost limbs, and even sprout extra vines or tendrils whenever they need to, which is beyond impressive if you ask me. While they share a lot, each of them has some distinct abilities too. In Man-Thing's corner, his big thing is his connection to emotion. He's attuned to what everyone around him is feeling, whether it's love or hatred. But there's one emotion he cannot stand, and that's fear. When people or creatures nearby feel intense fear, it triggers something inside Man-Thing. If he then touches someone who's gripped by that emotion, he can burn them. That's where his famous tagline comes from. Whoever knows fear burns at the Man-Thing's touch. Another unique power Man-Thing has is his control over something called the nexus of all reality. It's a gateway to every single dimension in the multiverse. It's located right in his home turf, the Florida Everglades. He protects it from evil, but he can also use it to travel through time and space himself. Swamp Thing, on the other hand, has some special tricks Man-Thing doesn't. One is the ability to make copies of himself. He can create duplicates that he controls, and this helps Swamp Thing beat Batman in a fight using these copies. Over time, these copies can develop their own consciousness, become separate beings from the original Swamp Thing. During a comic run by Nancy Collins, Swamp Thing left a copy of himself to protect his wife and child, while he went off on a mission to save the world. But his mission took way longer than expected, and that copy eventually developed its own mind and decided it was the real Swamp Thing, with its own life and family. When the original finally returned, they fought for control. Inspirations, parallel, and legal controversy. Turns out, both of our swampy heroes owe a big thank you to a much older character from the golden age of comics, called the Heat, which originated in 1942. The Heat was a German WW-1 pilot who crashed into a swamp and, you guessed it, transformed into a mossy creature. His connection to the swamp, his ties to a green, and his look clearly influenced both Marvel and DC when they created their own swamp monster. Roy Thomas, one of the co-creators of Man-Thing, was a big fan of the Heat and had tried to bring him back into comics before, so Man-Thing was intentionally designed to be a character like the Heat. Like I mentioned in the earlier sections, Man-Thing made his debut in Savage Tales #1 in May 1971. Just 2 months later, July 1971, the first Swamp Thing story appeared in House of Secrets #92. The fact that they both had almost identical origin stories got people talking and led to accusations that one was copying the other. It was even more noticeable because Jerry Conway, who co-wrote Man-Thing, and Lynn Wein, who co-created Swamp Thing, were roommates around the time the ongoing Swamp Thing series was being developed. And during that time, Swamp Thing's origin story was tweaked a bit to make it even more like Man-Thing's science-based transformation. Major comic storyline, thematic tone. Back in 1982, Nightmare on Elm Street, director Wes Craven, made a movie simply called Swamp Thing. Now, the comic book series had ended years before the film came out, but because movies mean money, DC wanted to ride that wave and launched a brand new comic series, Saga of the Swamp Thing, also in 1982. It wasn't received well, was close to being canceled. That's when DC made a genius move. They hired a relatively new British comic writer named Alan Moore to take over. Allen was already making waves in England with comics like V for Vendetta and Marvel Man. In his very first issue, he quickly wrapped up the existing story so he could hit the reset button on Swamp Thing. His fresh ideas, combined with the amazing artwork from Stephen Bissett and John Total, instantly grabbed the attention of everyone in the comic book world. Within a year, the series title was shortened to just Swamp Thing, and things got even more interesting because more stories were becoming so much darker with more horror and adult themes. The comic no longer carried that old Comics Code Authority stamp. His run on Swamp Thing was a huge success. The series even got special annual issues and double-sized specials. By 1987, comics themselves even got an upgrade, moving from the traditional cheaper newsprint paper to a slightly heavier, fancier paper with better colors and, of course, a higher price tag. His iconic run eventually wrapped up with the issue number 64 in 1987. Later on, Moore's first two major story arcs were collected into paperback books, making it easier for new fans to discover his work. His stories were so long and epic that DC had to break up the series somewhat random into 4 more collected volumes. Then in 2009, they started reprinting all 6 of those volumes in nice hardback editions for collectors. As of 2021, there's a new Swamp Thing in town, Levi Kamei. He's a young Indian scientist whose family has a connection to the Kaziranga wetland. His powers kicked in after a conflict between his community and some corporate types, which also led to his death and rebirth as Swamp Thing. Unlike previous versions, Levi can switch between his human and Swamp Thing form. Alec Holland's spirit and a fellow scientist, Jennifer Reese, helped guide Levi in his new role. This current Swamp Thing is more often seen as a member of the Titans. Swamp Thing has made the leap from comic pages to movies and TV quite a few times. His first live-action appearance was in the 1982 movie Swamp Thing, Dick Durock playing the creature and Ray Wise as Alec Holland. Durock even came back for the sequel, The Return of Swamp Thing, in 1989, and then played him again in a TV series that ran from 1990 to 1993. More recently, Derek Mears played Swamp Thing, with Andy Bean as Alec Holland in a 2019 TV series, and another Swamp Thing movie is currently in the works as part of the new DC universe. As for Man-Thing, he got his own 10-page feature and adventure into Fear in October 1972, sharing the comic with old horror star Steve Gerber, who would become the most successful writer for Man-Thing, took over the writing duty shortly after. The feature grew longer over time, eventually reaching the standard comic book length. After a good run in Adventure into Fear, Man-Thing finally got his very own comic book series, which ran for 22 issues, from 1974 to 1975. There was even a larger, quarterly comic called Giant-Sized Man-Thing that came out at the same time. These issues also included older horror and sci-fi stories, and later, even a 2-part story with Howard the Duck. The name of this series has become a bit of a running joke among comic fans because of its intended double meaning. In the very last issue of his first solo series, writer Steve Gerber appeared as a character, claiming he wasn't making up Man-Thing's adventures, but just reporting and that he was moving on. But he continued to write Man-Thing and other Marvel comics, and even in a short serialized feature. He also worked on a graphic novel with artist Kevin Nowlan, though he sadly passed away before it was published. A second Man-Thing series started up in late 1979 and lasted for 11 issues. The initial writer, Michael Fleischer, faced a lot of criticism and was replaced by Chris Claremont. Claremont brought Man-Thing and another character named Jennifer Kale into Doctor Strange's world, and then introduced new supporting characters like a sheriff and a wealthy girl, tying their stories into his other series, War is Hell. You could also find black and white Man-Thing stories and some color covers in the Marvel magazine, Monsters Unleashed. Man-Thing made guest appearances in other comics, like Uncanny X-Men in 1991, where he fought against a villain called Despair. There was also a Man-Thing story in Marvel Comics Presents in 1994, which was set soon after his transformation, but oddly showed him using a modern computer, which is a common comic book thing where timelines can be a bit flexible. Writer J.M. DeMatteis picked up Man-Thing's story in the early 80s and continued to write him in various Marvel titles, including a third Man-Thing miniseries in the late 90s. With artist Liam Sharp. They even worked on a feature for Strange Tales, though not all planned issues were published. More recent, Man-Thing became a regular character in the Punisher's Frankencastle storyline, and then joined the Thunderbolts team, continuing with them when the series changed its name to Dark Avengers. Steve Gerber's unfinished graphic novel, the screenplay of The Living Dead Man, finally saw print as a 3-issue miniseries in 2012, serving as a sequel to an older Man-Thing story. And in 2017, the famous horror author R.L. Stine even made his comic book debut with a 5-issue Man-Thing miniseries. Who would win? Fan debate and cultural impact. When fans talk about this, a lot of people immediately point to Swamp Thing having a massive advantage. Why? Well, his deep connection to the green and his sharp intellect. People describe Swamp Thing as practically a god, or at least having godlike powers. As long as he can tap into the green, this means he can instantly appear anywhere there's plant life, grow to enormous sizes, and control all plants. And Man-Thing's biggest weapon is his empathic touch, to heal from damage, and gets stronger by feeding on fear. Fortunately, he doesn't have a human mind or the ability ability to plan. He reacts to emotions, and that's why he is predictable. In a straight-up fight, most fans and analysts lean towards Swamp Thing winning. He can reform himself somewhere else if he's destroyed, or he could overwhelm Man-Thing with an entire forest of plants. Man-Thing might be tough, but that's a lot to handle. Also, as a plant elemental, Swamp Thing might not even experience fear in a way that would trigger Man-Thing's burning touch. Or, even if he did, his connection to the green would let him heal from such an attack instantly. As I'm telling you all this, guys must have figured out who's going to win. Marvelous verdict. While the debate of who would win often leans one way, both characters need to be explored more in live-action media. What do you think? Are you Team Man-Thing or Team Swamp Thing? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more videos and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe.